You are not your diagnosis. You're not your attachment style, your Enneagram number, your Myers-Briggs type, your astrological sign and archetype, or the sum of what happened to you before you were old enough to choose. You are not your label. You are a man with genuine freedom, accountable for what you do with that freedom from this point forward. This is a bonus episode of the podcast, and it stands a little outside of the usual material that I deal with, but it's something I've come across in my own pastoral practice and in my coaching practice as well. I've seen it spread through social media, through therapy culture, and increasingly through the men's self-development arena, and it deserves to be named directly. It's a kind of a grammatical move, and it goes like this. Your brain learned this in childhood. Not you learned it, your brain learned it. She can't understand your male brain. It's not that she can't understand you. No, it's your brain she can't understand. There are other examples. I struggle with intimacy because I'm an anxious avoidant. I can't focus because I have an ADHD brain. I react this way because I'm the adult child of an alcoholic. The shift is subtle enough that it could pass for self-awareness. The man who says this sort of thing has done his reading, he's picked up the cool vocabulary, he can name his patterns with clinical precision, but there's a difference, a significant, consequential, meaningful difference between naming a pattern as something that happens to you and owning it as something that you do. And that difference is exactly where personal transformation either happens or it doesn't. I want to be clear about what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying that ADHD doesn't exist, or that attachment theory is worthless, or that childhood wounds aren't real. They are real, the wounds are real, the patterns are real, the brain chemistry is real. The question is, what do you do with them? And more specifically, who is doing it? So look, let me give you an illustration. I've been hearing confessions for 31 years, and I have heard more than once a confession that begins, well, Father, as the adult child of an alcoholic, I cut it off. Gently, but immediately. I hear confessions from individuals, from people, not from diagnoses. The confessional is precisely the context in which a man is supposed to stand before God and own what he did, to say, I did this. He should not blame anything on his history, his neurotype, or his attachment style. He should say, I did this, I own it, I repent of it, and I want to change. The diagnostic move in the confessional is a tell, not because the diagnosis is false, but because it's being used as a shield. The man knows somewhere that accountability is coming, and he's holding up his diagnosis between himself and that accountability. I've seen the same move elsewhere. Women labeling themselves as empaths as a way of explaining why they can't hold a boundary for themselves or anyone else. Young men unwilling to push themselves towards something greater because they have ADHD. Young people handicapped not by their circumstances, but by the labels they've internalized. Stupid, pothead, screw up, or in my own case for a lot of years, a dumbass. The label becomes a ceiling. And once that ceiling is set, well, there's no sense trying to break through it, is there? Aristotle draws a distinction that is, I think, really helpful here. He distinguishes between acting in ignorance and acting from ignorance. The man who acts badly because he honestly didn't know better, who lacked good information, or found himself in a situation where the right path was hard to see, is in one moral category. He acts in ignorance. His ignorance is real, and it mitigates his culpability. The man who acts from ignorance is in a completely different category. He has cultivated over time a disposition toward not knowing. He has made himself into the kind of person who reaches for anything that will excuse himself when accountability threatens. He's not ignorant, he's evasive. And that evasion has become, through regular repetition, a habit, which is to say it has become a vice in the classical sense. The diagnostic categories are not in themselves the problem. ADHD, attachment styles, Enneagram types, Myers-Briggs profiles, they're not the problem. The problem is when they're used as an excuse to avoid personal agency and then call it self-knowledge. At that point, the diagnostic categories aren't helping the man to live better. They're helping him stay stuck with a sophisticated vocabulary for explaining why. And I'll add, because it needs to be said, a great deal of money is being made on this. The sudden explosion of attachment style content and ADHD brain talk on social media didn't come about by a sudden breakthrough in neuroscience. It arose because it sells. Systems that tell men their problems are not their fault are an extraordinarily effective marketing tool. The therapeutic industrial complex has discovered that removing blame is a product, and it's moving a lot of units. There's a deeper problem with the brain language specifically, and it is anthropological. When I say, my brain learned this rather than I learned this, we're implicitly splitting the human person. That is to say, we're locating agency in the physical mechanism of the brain and placing the self, the person, somewhere else as an observer of that mechanism. This is not a minor grammatical preference. This is a claim about what a human being is. The broad Christian tradition, and frankly Aristotle before that, insists on the unity of the person. You are not a brain having experiences. You are not a nervous system generating behaviors. You are a person, irreducible, accountable, having genuine freedom. That freedom is not unlimited. It's conditioned by a lot of things, history, by wound, by habit, but it is real. And it is precisely that freedom which makes metanoia, repentance, reform possible. The actual turning of the mind, the change of direction that is more than the management of a condition. Strip away the freedom, and you strip away the possibility of genuine transformation. What you have left is system or symptom management, which has its place, sure, but it's not the same thing as becoming a different man, or, as we Christians say, becoming a new creation. I want to tell you where I've lived this myself, because I think it matters that the objection I'm raising here isn't abstract for me. For most of my life, I blamed genetics for my inability to get into shape. My mother's side of the family ran heavy. It was in the blood. It was simply how I was built. I remember when I was in elementary school going to the store with my mother, and she bought me husky jeans. Even a little boy knows that husky is a polite term for fat kid. So I was husky for most of my life. And then a coach gave me a diet and exercise plan and held me accountable to it, and I discovered at age 53 that I could build muscle, lose fat, and compete on stage as a bodybuilder. 53 years of a story I told myself, and it took only 10 months of disciplined work to prove it false. The genetics were real. The broad hips, the narrow shoulders, they're real. The ceiling they imposed on me was not. Again, I lost my father when I was 8 years old. He was killed in an industrial accident. It had nothing to do with me, nothing at all to do with anything that I did or I didn't do. But I was 8 at the time. And 8-year-olds don't think in terms of industrial accidents. What an 8-year-old thinks, in the wordless way that children think, is, why wasn't I worth staying around for? And that thought, irrational, unfair, the invention of a grieving child in the dark, hardened over years into something that felt like a fact about me. There was something wrong with me, something inherently inadequate. I carried that story for decades. And the compassionate truth I want to offer is this: the wound was real. The story the child told to explain it was not. And the work of becoming a man included, at some point, recognizing the difference and deciding that I was no longer going to let an 8-year-old's explanation govern an adult man's life. I read Robert Glauber's No More Mr. Nice Guy and recognized myself on every page. Nice guy syndrome, the pattern of people pleasing, of indirect communication, of suppressed anger, of covert contracts, are real patterns, and Glover names them well. But this is what makes the book useful rather than merely validating. Glover doesn't stop at the diagnosis. He hands the pattern back to you. He says, this is the pattern, here is where it comes from, and here's what you're going to do differently starting now. Glover's schema serves accountability rather than replacing it and excusing you. And that's the distinction. A schema that names your pattern in order to hand it back to you as yours to work with is a great tool. A schema that names your pattern in order to explain why you can't help it is a trap, however sympathetically it's marketed. So how do you tell the difference? How do you know whether you're using a tool or a trap? One test. Does it end with you or does it end with the condition? If the final word of the explanation is, and that's why I struggle with X, full stop, that's where it lands, then it's a trap and it's functioning as a ceiling. If the final word is, and here is what I'm going to do about it, then it's a tool and it's functioning as a floor. Another test, does it increase your agency or decrease it? Genuine self-knowledge, the kind the classical tradition valued, the gnothi seavton, know thyself of the Delphic oracle. That kind of self-knowledge makes a man more capable of action, not less. It clarifies the field so he can move through it. If a system is making you feel more stuck, more defined by your history, more convinced that change is structurally difficult for someone like you, then it's not serving you well, regardless of how clinically sophisticated it sounds. A third test. Who profits from you staying stuck in it? And a fourth, which is the one I find most clarifying. Does it call you to anything? Does it place any demand on you? Or does it simply explain you and leave you where you are? A genuine account of human nature, whether it comes from Aristotle or from Moore or from the Christian tradition, always places a demand on you. It says, here is what you are, and so here is what you must do. A system that only explains and never demands is not trying to help you grow. It's trying to keep you comfortable enough to stay subscribed. The wound is real, the pattern is real, the history is real. None of that is in dispute. What is in dispute is the conclusion that because the wound is real, you can't move beyond it. The ceiling above you is fixed. That because your pattern has a name, you are the pattern. That because your history shaped you, your history owns you. You are not your diagnosis. You're not your attachment style, your Enneagram number, your Myers-Briggs type, your astrological sign, an archetype, or the sum of what happened to you before you were old enough to choose. You are not your label. You are a man with genuine freedom, accountable for what you do with that freedom from this point forward. What's the story that's been doing your thinking for you? If you're carrying a story that's been doing your thinking for you, and you're ready for a conversation that hands the work back to you rather than excusing you from it, maybe I can be of service. Check out my website and let me know. Link is in the description. I'll see you soon. The forge is open.